Welcome to the Filmcast review of Bottoms. I'm going to read the plot summary of this movie from IMDb. Two unpopular queer high school students start a fight club to have sex before graduation. End quote. That old chestnut. Joining us today for our review of Bottoms, she is a writer and editor at slashfilm.com and co-host of the This Ends at Prom podcast, which is a coming-of-age show for films about or marketed towards teen girl audiences. BJ Colangelo, welcome to the Filmcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
That
So
is
great.
a unique Venn diagram that fits perfectly for what we're talking about.
This is why our listeners have been screaming for the last 2 months. When are you going to talk about Bottoms?
Did you manifest this movie, BJ? I feel like.
When I first saw the synopsis of this movie, I was like, oh, so somebody has been sneaking into my house and giving my diaries to Emma Seligman because this is all I've ever wanted.
We are so thrilled to have you here, BJ. I've really enjoyed a lot of BJ's work over at slashfilm.com as well as on the Slash Film show. But let's talk about Bottoms. Obviously a movie that feels like it falls squarely within your interest, BJ, but I am curious, overall, what did you think of the movie?
So admittedly, I was terrified that I wasn't going to like this movie because it does hit so many intersections of what I like. I really love the director because Shiva Baby was one of my favorite movies the year that it came out. I love teen stories. I love subversive teen stories and raunchy comedies and sex comedies. And I'm a lesbian in identity and in practice. So getting to have that in a movie is all I've ever wanted. And I'm so fortunate and thankful that this is exactly as I expected it to be. It is hilarious. It is subversive. It is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. I think that queer cinema needs to scare the straights a little bit more, and I feel like Bottoms does that in tenfold.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Queer cinema needs to scare the straights a little bit more. Just curious what you mean by that. I mean, I don't disagree. I'm just curious if you can elaborate on that.
And hey, by the way, if you don't already have those T-shirts made up, you need to make those. Scare the straights.
Yeah, I really should. I've been really slacking on my brand merchandising.
Yes.
But the way that I look at it is when you look at the history of queer cinema, so much of it is subversive. It was controversial. And, I am a person who worships at the altar of filmmakers like John Waters. Like, that is very much where I come from. And that is not, family friendly in any way, shape, or form. But what has happened is that in the push for assimilation culturally, we've also started to see that reflected in our artwork, and queer art has become extremely sanitized. Studios have realized, oh, you can appeal to the four quadrants with queerness, so let's do that. But unfortunately, that means it's a very specific type of queerness. It's extremely white, very palatable, very friendly, a very gender affirming type of queerness. And while that definitely has value, because it does help a lot of younger viewers see themselves earlier than they would, which is great, it is unfortunately kind of pushed away and scared people off from wanting to make these really edgy queer stories with messy queer characters who are making mistakes and being awful. Because, spoiler alert, some queer people are terrible, and we're allowed to be terrible.
Well, I would agree that there's a whole range of quality of people in the movie. Devindra Hardwar, curious about your thoughts on Bottoms.
Oh yeah, I absolutely love this movie. Also, really dug Shiva Baby, but I was not prepared for the tone
Yeah.
of this movie, which I think
Yeah.
the marketing didn't quite make clear. Like, it is very much. It feels like in the John Waters wheelhouse at times, but also in the very like tonally zany and wacky stuff. Like, it's a very kooky movie, and I kind of love that. And I walked into this thing not expecting it. I was actually able to take my wife, and she's also a huge fan of all the John Waters stuff. So like, I think this was like a fun thing for us to watch together. It feels like a mishmash of Heathers, Fight Club, of course, and Jennifer's Body, which is a movie that I think was kind of like panned when it came out and has been reassessed as a sort of like, queer commentary thing that I think is really well done. I like that movie a lot. I think this movie is hilarious. It continues Ayo Edebiri's incredible year. Rachel Sennett continues to be fantastic. I love everybody involved in here. Also feel like I appreciate like many of the dudes know exactly the tone to hit for just how silly this movie can be. So, you know, I appreciate it. Like, everybody's firing on all cylinders. Marshawn, great stuff. I have thoughts on the ending, which is where I think this movie could have gone really far and been like almost revolutionary, or at least try to say something more. And I was a little let down by like where things end up, but we'll dive into that.
I will admit, I was very skeptical that I could believe Ao Edebiri as a high school student after I had just seen her try to open one of the highest end restaurants in Chicago on the Bear.
High school students are doing that all the time, Dave.
All the time.
But then I started watching the movie. The way I described it, which not everyone needs to agree with, is I said it was like, if not another teen movie was shot like an 80s slasher film. You know, like that's kind of how I would describe the tone personally, is like the vibes I got off of it. And I love both of those things, by the way. I'm a not another teen movie defender. The only one I know. It's a very lonely club, but I really enjoy that movie.
I mean, you love it so much you've never mentioned on the show, Dave. So amazing.
Wow.
One of Dave's touchstones that he never brings up in any.
You just watch it every night. Yeah.
Devindra calling out my behavior by referring to things that I've actually
calling out 20 years of history between me and David Chen. Yes.
I did like a Twitch, like when Prime Video launched the ability to like do a watch party. I did like a live Twitch stream where I watched and commented on. This is at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But that was unfortunately not a Filmcast. I didn't invite you guys because here's the thing: not very many people like that movie,
and also because you never invite us to anything.
That's so true. Jeff Kanata, your thoughts on Bottoms?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts on Bottoms are best summed up in the form of a limerick.
You know, Jeff, I think we might need to just explain to BJ what this bizarre ritual you're partaking in.
Oh my goodness! Yes, yeah. I have to apologize to you, BJ, because what is about to happen is not pleasant for any of us.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Dave, he rules this podcast with an iron fist. His will, his insatiable thirst for limericks means that it falls on me every single week to write a limerick and say it on the show, or he has vowed he will not only leave the show, he will destroy it from within.
Wow.
And I believe that because Dave is an incredibly intimidating presence.
Yes.
So.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
In fact, that was sarcastic. I don't know how I feel about that, but okay. All right, go ahead,
I'm
Jeff.
so glad somebody else senses the pressure that Devindra and I are under every single week. All right, here's my limerick for Bottoms. The humor's a kick in the crotch, and both leads in the film are top notch. But the tone is uneven and left me believing it was more fun to make than to watch.
So Jeff Kanata, not as big of a fan of this.
I'm not as big of a here's the thing. I want to preface this by saying this movie wasn't made for me. I'm old. I certainly didn't dislike my experience watching it. I just don't think it was hitting for me in the way it would hit for someone who is 20 years younger than I am. My generation, it was Clueless and Dazed and Confused, and
Heathers, Jeff. Heathers is right there.
Yeah, Heathers was a little earlier. Let's be honest, a little earlier than me, Devindra, a little earlier. But right after my generation, it was American Pie. Like that was a little too late for me. And then like Superbad, right? This movie is in that pantheon of a movie that I think if you're in high school and you watch this, it's talking about stuff you are experiencing every single day. It's lampooning the people in your world. These aren't the people in my world, right? I'm not seeing the high school jock and the hot girl and all those sort of high school things. I'm removed from that enough that while I remember it, this movie is speaking to the generation that's going through it now. And I applaud that. Like, I think I fully recognize that this could be my favorite movie if I was in high school right now. Or, it's probably a lot of high schoolers going to see this are like, oh, this is the movie I'm going to quote. I'm going to watch it over and over. I'm going to love it. It doesn't resonate like that for me. That doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It's just I'm sort of ill-equipped to comment on it. For me, I found all of the things that Devindra just lauded about the movie, I found to be it kind of not work well. For example, I think that our two leads, who I love as actors, I also loved Shiva Baby. I think they're both superstars that are going to have long, interesting careers, and they are in a different movie than some of the other people in this movie. Some of the other people in this movie are in, and I know I'm using the term that we have been advised not to use, a cartoon. They are in a car. I don't mean that as a derogatory
We need to set
term.
off like alarm bells whenever that word is deployed now.
I love cartoons. That is not that is not a pejorative.
For some background, one of our listeners who was a cartoonist wrote into the Filmcast at one point and was like,
"How dare you?
I don't like you using cartoon in a dismissive or pejorative fashion." But Jeff,
I hasten to add,
right into it anyway.
That is not the intent. I just think it's totally fine to be in a movie that is big and winky and kind of, doing large gags and stuff, but I just don't think the entire movie is there. Sometimes some characters are there and others are not, and to me that didn't mesh well in viewing the movie. I was much more interested in the movie that our leads are in, because that felt like a more grounded, realistic movie, and they keep bumping into people that are larger than life, that are two-dimensional, that are I felt to be very much winking at the camera and very aware that they were mugging and doing a goof. And it just didn't work for me particularly. That said, there's some really fun stuff in this movie. I love Marshawn. There's enough here that I would recommend people checking it out. And if you're in that, age range or near it, I'm sure this is going to feel like your generation's that movie. And I think that's pretty cool that they've made that, and it is this subversive and weird and quirky. Like I like that about it. It's just not a movie that I fell in love with.
I think that's totally fair, Jeff. I had a really interesting experience because I spent the first 20 minutes of this film trying to figure out what exactly the tone was, and it took me a while to really understand, oh, they're just going way over the top. Now, I do understand. I think you're right that the main characters aren't really that, but I think literally the rest of the world is, right? Like everything, all the other components are to an extreme extent, where the way the school is built, the art on the walls of the school, the fact that there's a cage in the classroom and so on, it all is it's all unremarked upon, and it's this really it's rare that a movie will take a swing like this, where it's just like, hey, we're gonna make a world that is a wildly exaggerated version of the real world that has no real basis in reality, and try to tell a somewhat serious story about it. For me, it worked, but I completely understand. If you're not on the movie's wavelength, I get why it's not gonna work, and I get why the two leads kind of not being in the rest of the movie would be clashing. You know what I mean?
It makes sense. First of all, by the way, this is a very anti-Jeff movie, so I see Jeff. This is very anti-Jeff.
Wait! Don't do that to me. What does that mean?
Jeff is the villain of this movie, Jeff.
Oh, well.
Yes.
But the other one, Jeff.
Yes.
This is anti-Jeff. Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
But the other
I
thing,
love that about it. I just didn't think the actor playing Jeff.
He's great. I love him. He's but what
you have not seen, Jeff, you have not seen Red, White, and Royal Blue.
I have not.
Oh yeah,
because if you had, you would think that this performance is incredible. Okay, anyway, go ahead.
It's more
one
like
thing I want to point out,
Joe versus the volcano.
Joe versus the volcano. It's like Joe versus the volcano, where the world is an abstraction that is meant to highlight how bizarre the experience of being in our world is bizarre, and so the world as represented is bizarre.
That is the point I'm going to make. Being somebody who doesn't fit in to high school and going through the American high school system feels like madness. It feels insane, like the way schools treat jocks, which is still a thing. It's still a thing. And if you are not part of the majority group or the class majority group, it feels like an alien world to go to school. So I felt that during high school, and that movie feels like it's reflecting that.
Yeah,
And part
totally.
of the tonal shifts too is because there's three separate layers of teen movie tropes happening at one time. There's the fact that this movie, well, all teen movies are both time capsules and fantasy films. That is a thing that we talk about a lot on our podcast, This Ends at Prom, where teen movies are trying to, exactly what you said, hit what is cool right now, speak to what the generation is doing right now. They have zero interest in being a timeless classic. So they're hitting what's cool now. So they become really interesting reflections of the society at the time. That's really cool. But at the same time, they're fantasy films because they are living in this heightened reality of the American high school experience. So you've got those tropes playing. At the same time, this movie is taking what is often subtextual in high school movies and making it textual. Yes, the school really is that obsessed with the quarterback and will bend over backwards to appease them in whatever way they can. They do genuinely hate the weird queer kids that much and are just annoyed by their existence. We're making it textual. So you've got that going on. But then the biggest thing is that the Heathers comparison I definitely see. It's absolutely there. But this movie has so much more DNA sharing with screwball teen sex comedies like a Porky's, like a
Mhm.
Meatballs, like a Last American Virgin even, than it does any of the teen movies that we typically see that star or about girls. This is a very like sex boy sort of
Mm.
approach to it, and then that makes things feel very weird because a lot of these familiar archetypes, or like we know how this person's going to behave, they don't behave in that way and we're not used to seeing it, so it is a wild adjustment. I've seen this movie 3 times now, and the first time I had to go through that adjustment phase of like, what is the tone? What is happening here? The second time I like really let myself live in this world. I enjoyed myself. And the third time I became a scientist, and it was like, oh, I see exactly what's going on here. This is pulling from this decade of teen movies. This is pulling from, the 90s. This is pulling from the 80s, and how it's all coming together with a very Gen Z approach to comedy. And so I get why it feels kind of chaotic, but also we are like the most ADHD generation possible. I'm not even in Gen Z. I'm a millennial, but we're all very ADHD. So there's something really nice that just like itches a part of my brain when I watch this movie because there's so much happening at once.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, you're never bored watching the film, in my opinion. So, but yeah, I also quite enjoyed the film and found it to be really amusing. And it's really the two leads that anchor the whole thing for me. I think they just have great chemistry with each other. And as you hinted at, BJ, they do terrible things and are kind of oblivious to that for most of the film's runtime. And there's something really refreshing about characters that don't like the movie doesn't feel the need to defend in any way,
Mhm.
uh, and doesn't feel the need to moralize about. So anyway, I had a great time with Bottoms, but there's a few other topics to discuss. So anything else before we get to spoilers? Otherwise, let's hit it. Here we go. Let's do spoilers for Bottoms starting right now. Devindra Hardware, I think you had brought up that you were a
Mhm.
little bit unsatisfied with Bottoms' ending, and I'm curious if you could elaborate on that.
I think this is a movie that was building up to being like this is going to be a great battle or something between the outcasts and the jocks, right? And at some point, I think it's when they go visit their queer spiritual guide, right? Where it's like somehow the takeaway is, oh, we got to protect these boys from the other team because they're evil, and I'm like, what? I don't I don't care about this other team, really, and
Right.
why should they care about the school's goal of defeating the other team, no matter how mad they may be? So I feel like there is some weird through line there that maybe was erased in some other scenes, or it feels almost like responding to notes like you gotta at least be kind, like show some humanity for the jocks somehow. So that part just didn't quite strike through to me, and I feel like I can understand the finale being like a pretty low budget affair, right? It's not a big crowd. There's like not too much happening. Like this is not a big budget movie, but I feel like the messaging just got really unclear by the end, for me at least.
I actually really appreciated how creepy it was that there was no crowd. Like
Right,
they
right.
really did a good job of
Yeah.
like one
That's like
side
my high school.
is
Yeah.
one side is completely packed and the other side has no crowd, and it's like
Mhm.
there's something just feels really off about that.
That's funny
Um,
because the idea is that the other crowd knew that they were going to murder everyone.
Yes.
They didn't want to show up.
Yeah. BJ, I'm curious, like what you thought about the ending. I kind of agree with Devindra that it does get a little bit muddled for me, where Josie visits her kind of mentor character, and then that was kind of where I was like, who is this person? Why do we care about what they have to say? And like that was kind of where it went a little bit off the rails for me. What do you think, BJ?
So for me, the Rhodes character is this is the prototype that you see in a lot of teen movies, where you have to have a random inspirational monologue. Usually it's from a dad in a bathrobe, but this time it's not, which I quite enjoy, where it feels very out of place, but it's a scene everybody talks about. So to have that in here and present it in this way, I appreciate. But the ending for me, this is where the movie feels the most Gen Z for me, because while the clique nature of high school really hasn't changed, it has evolved in a way that is very different than what we're used to seeing in films, even into the aughts, where there is this semblance of like, we do have to work together. We do need to have solidarity. We do have to do what is right. So the fact that even though the football players have been horrific to them this entire
they
movie,
deserve nothing.
They deserve nothing. There's still this like obligatory sense of like, we got to do the right thing and help them. And there's also this like, background thought of, we humiliated these girls. We need to do right by them. And the easiest way to do right by them is to get them back in the good graces of our community. And the best way to do that is to save the football players, because they are untouchable gods. So if we help them, everyone's going to be back on our side. So like, I get the mindset behind it, but it does also feel a little after school specially, which kind of feels like the point, where it's like, no, like, fuck these guys. They don't deserve anything good.
If somebody at the end had been like, hey, why did we do this? Like, they'd never apologize. Right. I don't know.
If there had been some kind of ironic detachment from it, maybe it would have gone down a little bit easier.
I think so. I think that would have been helpful, because there's also so many little things that further that to me. Like when they identify the one friend as being a Black Republican, and she's like, you may be a Black Republican, but you're the smartest person I know. So they're even acknowledging like, we don't see eye to eye on these things, but I do need your help in this situation.
Fair enough. Are there any other kind of memorable things in the film that stick out to folks? Because I think this is one of those movies where it's like, oh, there's a lot of great, surprising or shocking moments, and I do feel like we should take a little bit of time to talk about some of them. So, BJ, anything like stick out for you? Any moments stick out for you in this movie?
I'm obsessed with the subplot of Hazel and Hazel's mom. Going through the midlife crisis post-divorce, wearing all of the robes that say like, I've just killed my fifth husband, and sleeping with a high school student. Because again, like teen boy sex comedies, this is usually seen as like a very cool thing. There's like a weird subplot in Valley Girl where the guy's trying to sleep with the person's mom. And this
Stifler's
is
mom. The whole
Stifler's
thing.
mom. Yeah, it's like the MILF thing is a thing. And this is one of the first movies that's like, no, this is messed up. Like, this is not like a cool thing we should be aspiring for teenage boys. And this is not a cool thing that Hazel's mom is doing. So I love that little side plot, and the fact that Hazel's way of dealing with her parents' divorce is she's getting into terrorism. Like, that's really funny to me.
I was impressed with how well drawn Hazel's mom is with so little. Like it's really shorthanded, and we get it. Like there very little is communicated about her. Very little or a lot is communicated, but very little time is spent doing so. We get it, like you said, with how she dresses, one or two scenes of seeing her, and a couple of comments, and we completely understand that woman's entire deal.
Yes.
It's impressive.
I'm just gonna say, Carolina has had a difficult life after the events of Succession, is all I'm going to put. That woman is played by Dagmar Dominic, who they're talking about, by the way, if you don't know. But yes, I agree that character is awesome. And the way that holds, I just love how the jocks wear, like, it's just a very subtle thing. It's not, but they wear full football uniform and padding for the entire film.
It's like Daria. The kids from Daria, the football players there. Yeah.
It's
Well,
awesome.
it's also
a cartoon.
It's also like how typically in high schools on game day, that's what the cheerleaders have to do. Is
Mm.
cheerleaders wear their uniforms all day. And so to see the football players doing it, it's a really nice subversion where if you're not paying attention, it just feels like a fun choice. But if you really remember that and remember, why do the cheerleaders get to wear skirts that are that short, but if I wear a skirt that's short, I get in trouble and I get suddenly sent to the office over breaking dress code, but they can do that? That's bullshit. So little things like that, I'm like, ooh, that one was for me. Thanks, Emma.
There's so many awesome things happening in the background of frames with regard to the football players too. Yes, they always wear their full uniform to school, but they never wear their helmets at practice, which is
Right.
so both sides of it make no sense whatsoever, right? It's absurd on both ends, and there's all these wonderful little moments of the quarterback Jeff, who everyone just has to put on a pedestal. At practice, he just walks by people and they fall dramatically as if he's hit them hard. It is this idolatry that is so exaggerated and fun in the movie as well.
I love Jeff, and I love the guy who plays Tim with the actor Miles Fowler, because they also both stress just silly as hell. Like Miles, Tim at the opening scene, the early scene where he's just shouting to the camera, and then there are a couple different takes of that. It's like that'll either be a complete failure of a take, or if you know what you're doing and you're tonally competent as a film, that just hits. And I think that was the first time I was like, oh yeah, this movie is very silly and I love it. Then you go straight to the classroom where there's a guy in a cage in the back, so you're not in a normal teen movie. Yeah.
It does seem like this is a movie where a lot was improvised based off of the kind of bloopers that or alternate takes that they show in the credits. And it does have that kind of looseness to it, which some people may enjoy more than others, but I think it is worth mentioning. BJ, before I wrap up here, I do want to mention you wrote a piece about Bottoms for /film.com entitled "Bottoms is Here to Save Us from Sanitized Queer Representation." We touched upon this a little bit during the pre-spoiler, but I am curious if there's anything else that you want to mention about how this movie saves us from sanitized queer representation.
Sure. So I'm wading in the discourse waters a little bit by saying this. But if there's one thing that I hate more than anything in film, it's the idea of quote unquote good representation or positive representation. It makes my skin crawl and makes me want to scream into the void endlessly, because there's no such thing. It does not exist. What is positive representation for one person is oppressive representation for another. And we've gotten into this weird trend lately where in order to have a queer character presented, they have to be these weird, perfect, I hate to use the trope, but Mary Sue type, queer Mary Sue type characters where there's nothing wrong with them, or else people complain. I spent way too much time in the discourse mines during Happiest Season, a lesbian Christmas rom-com. That is not happy. It is not a happy movie, and there's a lot of conflict, and people kept screaming and crying, why can't we have something nice? Well, that exists in a lot of places. We have nice queerness more than we have bad queerness. The bad queerness is just the stuff that ends up getting Oscars. So it's really nice to see a film like Bottoms that is so unapologetically raunchy, and they're making bad decisions, and Rachel Sennot's PJ is an asshole. And something that I think is really important that this movie does is that none of the girls in this movie are bitches, they are assholes. There is a difference. There is a huge difference in behavior. They're being mean, but they're not being catty. They are completely subverting the way that girl aggression is shown in film, and that just is so refreshing. It's so nice to see a queer character screw up and lie and be a bad person, because the problem that we end up having is, so many of us look to media to learn things either about ourselves or other people or other communities. If you never give the space for failure, if you never give the space for something to be bad, then what ends up happening is you put real people on a pedestal. And then suddenly, because I am one of the only openly lesbian people that a lot of people know in real life, I then become representative of the entire community. And that's a problem. It's a weird form of tokenization. We're seeing it especially especially with queerness and transness because of how bad legislation is getting in America. So to have a movie come out, especially in this time period, and have these characters be a bunch of assholes is so nice. And it allows all of us to kind of breathe for a second so we can go, oh, good. We're not that bad. We're not stabbing football players in front of an audience. Whew, we're good. We're good for another week.
Fair enough. Can I ask you to clarify the point you made about cattiness versus what was that drawn in
Oh,
contrast to?
sure. So being an asshole versus a bitch or being
Yeah,
cruel
yeah,
versus catty.
yeah.
Yeah, there is a very specific way in which female aggression is gendered, especially in teen films. You look at a good example of something like Mean Girls. Mean Girls is peak cattiness and bitchiness. It is done behind the back. It is done in a way that is not just manipulative. It is like ruin your life and traumatize you and require you to go to therapy sorts of manipulative cruelty. But whereas in this movie, it's a lot more in your face. It's a lot more upfront about it.
Mhm.
When PJ and Josie are talking about this, plan to have this club, PJ is very matter of fact about it. Like her on the bleachers might as well be the Jonah Hill super bad speech on the field of like, we could be that mistake. Like she's very upfront about what her intentions are. And usually we don't let female characters have that in teen movies. It ends up having this coat above it of glossiness of like, you say something so mean to somebody, but you say it in a way where if they try to check you on it, you can gaslight them, where it's like,
Mhm.
that's a really cute outfit you have on. I could never pull that off. Where like you say that and you're like, that sounds so mean. But if you're like, what are you being mean to me? Why would you think I'm being mean to you? I told you your outfit was cute. What are you talking about? Like it's
Yeah.
this sort of like psychological warfare.
Yeah.
And we don't have that in this movie. Like there is a little bit of it with Josie making up her
Mhm.
lie about being in juvie, which is such an after school special monologue and really funny to me. But when she finally like gets busted about it, she's not busted in the typical girl way. She's busted in a way that we normally see in male sex comedies where it's in her face and it comes out real fast.
Yeah. As opposed to it kind of uh coming back to bite her in a bunch of different ways over the course of the next 3 years. It's just like
Mhm.
immediate consequences, This is
Exactly.
kind of one of the distinctions.
And the fact that they're showing their like literally just fighting, like just through fighting, like a thing that we talk about a lot on our podcast is the way that when girls are bullying in movies, the type of bullying is this like very methodical sort of thing. I don't understand why anybody is like, women could never be president because they would be bad at war. No, women are incredible at war. It's terrifying how good we are at war.
Teen girls are terrifying to me. People were throwing around that the clip from White Lotus season 1 with the girls by the pool talking to,
Yes.
and that's just like watching that scene was also like, oh, that's terrifying. And then she put them in their place just
Yeah.
by being hot. Like that was her rebuttal.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
Amazing.
like it's so terrifying.
There's a scene in White Lotus season
Mhm.
1 where Alexandra Daddario meets like a couple of younger women, and
Teens.
Sydney Sweeney.
and they are quite mean to her, and then she kind of puts them in their place by simply being hot. That's correct.
Yeah, it's
BJ, you don't have to tell all of us that women are good at war. We're all married.
yeah, it's like, and I'm gonna air my own dirty laundry here. I've been in a few fights where I grew up. Where I grew up was a little rough and tumble, so I've been in physical fights. I would much rather have a conflict with somebody and just punch each other in the face about it and be like, "All right, you good? You're good. Cool, we're good." Rather
Mhm.
than what I know absolutely happens, which is that somebody who doesn't like me from high school totally stalks my Instagram to this day, and we're in our 30s. Like, that's psycho behavior, but that's the kind of thing that we're conditioned to think that we need to be doing. So to see in this movie where it's like, nah, I'm just gonna punch you about it, nice, love it.
Can I take us on a little digression, actually, on that note, if I may? I saw this post recently about how, like, on TikTok, about how somebody was saying how they don't like posting on Instagram anymore because it feels very voyeuristic. Where like there's people who like, and this has happened to me, where somebody I met, I'm gonna say 20 years ago, has looked at every single Instagram story I have posted since then and has never said anything.
Psycho
Like,
behavior.
has never
What?
responded, has never liked, has never commented. And that's just
Yeah.
that's weird.
That's
That's
real
weird
though.
behavior, I think. Okay,
And
anyway,
like,
I
go
don't
ahead,
know. It's
Jeff.
weird.
Jeff,
I don't
go
know.
ahead.
We don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but
How many Instagrams are you background shadowing, Jeff?
Yeah, Jeff.
many, tons. What's the? You're putting it out there for people to look at. You're not sending it to
You
your
throw it a
email
like.
list
Once
of
in a
friends.
while, you
Yeah,
throw it a like.
throw
You're
it a like
hey,
once in a while.
good
Yeah.
job,
Throwing
buddy.
a like.
Yeah.
What do I don't. That is a
This is a two-way relationship, okay?
really that is a transaction
People are
I
posting
do
things
not
for
understand.
engagement, unless
Yeah.
it's a private channel. So it's
Fair
like,
enough.
whatever.
But anyway,
I don't even look at how many likes or who's liking my things. It's information I would be completely clueless to tell you about. I have no. There's no
Okay.
part of me.
Devindra, you
keeps
Yeah,
track of
yeah,
I
that.
see
yeah.
you. I see you. Yeah.
Man,
yeah.
I mean,
I'm old. I don't care about
I'll
these
post a
things.
picture of this is a real story. So I can move my eyes independently. So this is obviously an audio medium, so people don't know what that means. But basically, I can
Yeah.
cross one eye and not the other. And every once in a while, I'll post a picture or a video where I look annoyed and I'll make the one eye roll. The amount of times that my images have suddenly been tagged on like pretty girls doing eye tricks Instagram or whatever, I'm like,
Now that's
what is happening
Yeah.
here? How did
Yeah.
you even find this? Which means that someone found it at one point and they've just been following me this whole time, waiting for another drop. And it's
waiting
like,
for a drop.
this is wild behavior.
There is, I agree that there is massive psychological warfare occurring in the Instagram stories and who checks them and who looks at them. So
Mhm,
that's
mhm.
all,
Oh, yeah.
that's all I'm trying to say. That's all I'm trying to
Yep.
say. So
Now
anyway,
I'm starting
okay.
to worry that people are looking at the fact that I've looked at their Instagrams and
Absolutely,
there.
Jeff.
That is
I can
weird.
guarantee you that is the case.
Yes.
Guarantee
My
that.
wife doesn't use Instagram very actively. Like she does, but not really. And where she works is like a very high public place. She'll meet a lot of people and they'll go, "Oh, let me follow you on Instagram." And later on that day, she'll be like, "Why is this person liking this photo from 5 years ago?" And
Oh
it's like,
yeah, that's the
well,
worst.
to be fair, it's
again.
only like a few scrolls for you, but
still.
people don't look at the date. So suddenly they're
Yeah.
liking photos of her from
I think
2018.
it's weirder to throw a like on something than it is. Like that's such a hey, look at me. Like look at me. I don't know. If I'm just like looking at somebody's Instagram, what does that matter?
Throw
Who
something
cares?
in the like jar, Jeff. Just throw it
What does
right
likes
there.
do for you? It does nothing for you. I don't understand the transaction. Anyway,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts on Bottoms? The Emma Seligman movie. Go ahead, BJ. It sounds like you want to say something.
I just have to shout out Marshawn's improv skills because the lines he has are so fun. The couple of them that really stick with me. Anything that he says about feminism is hilarious. Anything he says about his divorce when it starts like leaking through what he's actually trying to say is really funny. But consistently across all three of my watches, when he opens class by saying the Holocaust, it happened, and then a kid goes to raise his hand, he goes, it happened, I lose my mind every
Nice.
single time because we need that sort of matter-of-fact approach to education, and certain states are trying to make it so we can't do that, and we need more teachers like Marshawn.
We
is
need
what
it
I'm
right
saying.
now.
if there's
Yeah.
any chance that you haven't seen Marshawn's episode of Murderville,
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. It's a revelation. I was like, this dude is talented.
Yeah, he is.
So
he is
funny.
a really solid improviser, and
Funny,
obviously has a
timing.
Yeah.
Like he's sharp. He's like quick on the draw on that stuff. He's great.
Yes.
Yeah, and in my Murderville episode, I was like, you go, Marshawn. And
Indeed.
I think I suspect he's going to get more of this stuff because he's good.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's good.
I think
good.
he's gonna have like the football player sports route that like Dave Bautista has been getting as an actor, where it's like, oh wait, no, you're genuinely good at this. Like,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
keep it going.
Yeah, I don't know if he's as talented as Dave Bautista
This
personally.
is very
I
John
think,
Cena.
I
This
think
is
he has
John
a
Cena
very
path.
specific
Yeah.
thing that he does very well.
We
you know?
haven't seen him stretch his dramatic muscles
How
yet.
dare you,
I
Dave?
We
haven't
don't
seen
know.
How dare you
do
put-
Shakespeare yet.
For
That's right.
beast mode in a box like that.
Totally fair. Totally fair.
No one
All right.
expected Big Dave to be as good as he is either. And
Yeah.
look at
Mhm.
him.
Well, maybe Marshawn will be the next Blade Runner movie, right? And just like really kick our asses at the beginning. Because, oh man,
He's gonna
Bautista.
wear super tiny glasses,
super tiny.
and kick
Yeah.
Ryan Gosling's ass.
And then M.
Um,
Night Shyamalan's going to be like that guy for my next movie. Honestly, I would love an M. Night Shyamalan directed Marshawn movie. That'd be great.
Indeed. All right. Well, anyway, we mostly had a great time with Bottoms. It is gonna be available on video on demand this week.
What?
So yeah,
Mhm.
you'll be able to
Yeah.
watch it at home. Very
It's not
soon.
doing it like it
Yeah.
had a lot of hype at the beginning, but now it's not doing well. in
That's right. It
theaters,
had a
so
great
video
per
on
screen
demand.
average when it
Mhm.
started. So it's like, oh, maybe this is going to be a big deal. It opened wider, wasn't a big deal, but you'll be able to watch it at home. And we all enjoyed it. We'd recommend it. I want to give a big shout out to BJ Colangelo, who is the writer and editor at slashfilm.com and co-host of This Ends at Prom, a coming-of-age podcast for films about or marketed towards teen girl audiences. You can check out her work at both of those places. BJ, thanks for chatting with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a delight.
And at the end of the day, it is really impressive that Emma Seligman made a movie. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.